All right. Yeah. So I am Alec, and I currently live up in Duluth, Minnesota. I'm 2 years out of my undergrad, which was in aerospace engineering, and I work for Cirrus Aircraft. And this is my second class of the MBA program. And then my concentration as of right now is going to be finance. Alex?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So I'm Alex Apps. I am up in the Keweenaw Peninsula of Michigan, up in the UP. I'm a vice president for an engineering services company. And I'm about 20 years out of my undergrad in mechanical engineering. I'm actually in the MASL program, just looking to polish my leadership skills and put some more tools in my toolbox as I've moved more into kind of the business operations side of the company and away from the technical aspects. Ben?
Yeah, I'm Ben Richburg. I live in Arden Hills, right by Bethel. I currently work at Bethel as an admissions counselor. This is also my second class of the MBA program. I also have the concentration in finance. Just kind of looking to, not really sure what I'm want to do down the road. So kind of, while I have this waiting point, trying to give myself the resources through an MBA to be set up for whatever field I go into. So, Camille.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. I'm Camille Cradaville. I live just south of Minneapolis. Did my bachelor's at Winona State University, graduated from there in 2010. I currently work for Accenture on a technology and strategy advisory team. And this is my second class in my MBA with a focus on strategy and execution.
Hey, everybody, my name is Con Wynn. I live in Shoreview, Minnesota, and I graduated from medical school in 2004. And I'm currently one of the primary care medical directors at M Health Fairview, which is a big health organization in Minneapolis. This is my second course of the MBA program, and my objectives are to get an MBA in the healthcare administration, so I could further develop as a leader as well as a clinician in the healthcare field. Okay, it's good to see everybody back, I guess today's this week's module in regards to our Zoom course is each participant will share one or two key takeaways from the Miller text and its relevance to his or her own growth and success as a leader. We want to use the Miller as our main text, but integrate other sources such as Konnikova, Liang, and other readings when it's appropriate. So does anyone want to go first in regards to this Zoom session?
I can go, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So the biggest key takeaway that I had from the Miller text is really just about personal accountability and how important it is in life and especially in leadership. This relates to me pretty well because a lot of times when we go into a client site, we see a lot of finger pointing and a lot of people trying to kind of cover their back to make sure that they don't get blamed for something that wasn't their fault. So it was really refreshing to read the Miller text just around personal accountability and kind of just drives home the point about taking, ownership and just, not pointing the finger, just trying to figure out what you can control and taking accountability and ownership of that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Sorry, I'm just hearing a bunch of echoing. But yeah, one of the big things that I took away was right away in chapter 14, and the quote was, "Whom do accountable people blame? No one, not even themselves." And that really got me thinking. And I was first off, I'm like, well, then, who do you blame? But then you think a little bit about that, and you're like, well, why do you have to blame somebody? Why does someone always have to be blamed? And I think it's just, use it as a learning experience and, move on. You don't have to start pointing fingers. So yeah, that was really interesting. And that really got me thinking about blame and pointing fingers.
Yeah, I was also along the same lines. I think a lot of this kind of module and also the book was focused on accountability, but I think it was chapter 20, yeah, chapter 21 that's talking about the only thing that we can change, or the chapter's called I Can Only Change Me, and kind of to go more than like the, okay, so we can't blame anyone, but what can we actually change? And Miller just talks about we can't change anyone but ourselves. We we often think like change has got to come like, oh, if they would only do this better or that better. I think I see that a lot in my job right now. Working in the admissions department, we work with professors, we work with financial aid offices, we work with the board of trustees and all these different things that feels like there's so many different groups working together, and a lot of times we get frustrated because it's like, oh, we want to see change in this, we want to see this change. And I think that was a good kind of wake up call for me to be like, all right, that's nothing that's in my control. What is in my control is how I'm doing my job and what can I do better and what can I change. So yeah, that was a big takeaway for me, was only being able to change myself.
I'll chime in here. So for me, this is actually the third time I've read the Miller book. I've had it on my shelf here for a couple of years. And to go back through it again, actually the one that really stood out to me is kind of that effectual point was chapter 18 about ownership. And I think that struck me differently this time, because in our business, we talk about ownership a lot. The nature of our work is we're solving problems for other companies. We're providing an engineering outsource service that is either helping them in ways that they don't have the internal skills, or we're bringing a fresh perspective, but it's constant problem solving. And we've tried to drive home this theme of ownership across all of our people, whether they're brand new to the company, fresh out of school, just got their degree, or whether they've been with us for a long time and they're helping manage and lead projects. Taking ownership in solving that problem is critical because every single one of them is different. It's not like we have our own product that we're running down an assembly line. We're always facing something new, and sometimes problems we haven't tackled before. Maybe we have to stretch our skills and our mindsets a little bit. But for me, looking at this chapter was really more about how do I take what we've already tried to ingrain in our culture and now apply that to my role as a leader and how I take ownership. And a key point there from Miller was that it simply means facing problems head on. And regardless of what the problem is, that should be our approach, but especially in a leadership capacity, to not let those other things creep in, like Alex said, with the blame game, or whatever that might be, the frustrations that might mount because we don't have time to deal with this. We've got other more pressing things to worry about. I think it's just key critical that we always take ownership. And so I tried to reflect on maybe why do I struggle with that at times. And actually the two other articles, the readings helped reinforce that a little bit for me, about resilience and, talking about sometimes your background helps shape how resilient you can be. And I recognize that oftentimes in my younger years, I would take on a challenge. I'd involve myself in something new, but maybe didn't really feel like I had the encouragement or the support of my parents or my family. And so I reflect on that now, saying, it's easy sometimes to give up when I don't feel like I have that support or that encouragement from my team, the people that I'm interacting with. It's like, okay, we'll do something with this, but is it really worth the time and investment? Is it really worth taking ownership? And it really is. And then the other article from Liang really emphasized towards the end, actually looking at referencing Ephesians, that we need each other, right? We can't do this alone. And every element of the team is essential. So that may not be a coherent thought in how I tied that all together, but really that ownership and owning it from beginning to end and drawing from the strengths of the team, I guess, is how I would summarize that takeaway for me.
Yeah. Yeah, guys, I've kind of, you guys did a really good job kind of summarizing what I had my thoughts too in regards to Miller, in regards to personal accountability, avoid signing blame, try to avoid changing people that rather than just focus mostly on yourself. The key thing I got out of this is avoid trying to play the victim, right? Trying to avoid, why is this happening to me? Why am I getting the wrong end of the deal? And I think part of that when you take, like when you met Alex in regards to taking ownership, in regards to maybe mistakes you made or things at that time, when you take ownership, it might feel horrible, you might feel vulnerable, you might even feel defeated among your peers. But man, after you do that, you know, man, in my experience, I'm glad I did that. I got off my shoulder. I even felt my peers respect me for owning up to my mistakes too. You know what I mean? In regards to the articles that were also in this week's module, I just love how Konnikova mentions how resilience and personal accountability can come such as a young age, meaning that these kids that came from such challenges as home abuse, low socioeconomic status, poor conditions at home, even abuse even, guess what? They didn't play that victim card, right? They get, why is this happening to me? Because of this, I cannot succeed. No, there's some of these kids that have this mindset that I'm not going to be the victim. They end up really going overcoming these obstacles, and they actually end up being successful. So I find that pretty amazing how resilience could be ingrained at such a young age. And when I was reading it, it's like, man, I shouldn't feel sorry for myself because there are other individuals that are going through a lot more than I am, and they're able to overcome these barriers. So that's what I got out of this, and it was a pretty when you read those kind of articles, it kind of makes you reflect on how you are as a person as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also especially found it interesting to reflect on reasons why I may not take accountability in certain situations. And I feel like I've gotten a lot better at that over the last 5 years, but early on in my career, I know I felt like afraid and, felt like if I admitted something or if I took accountability for something, it almost made me like weak or incompetent. But, over the years and especially through reading some of the texts for this week, like it's just the opposite. Once you do take accountability, that's when you have the opportunity to learn and practice resilience and then, bounce back even higher next time. So yeah, I wish that, and I guess I shouldn't say I wish, but it's just been so interesting to look at different companies from a consulting perspective and just observe their culture and observe like how they interact with each other and how they own up to things that are happening.
I'll tag on to that where, in my position, I actually moved into this role about 18 months ago and served as a program manager prior to that. And I think it's easy to find ourselves in positions, especially in a new role or of increasing responsibility, increasing leadership, to say, I've never dealt with this before, and maybe I don't have that go-to, or I don't have the experience to back up maybe an immediate direction or some solution to the problem. And that can breed some of those elements of victim thinking. It can also actually, I'm seeing a parallel here to something I hear from my 4-year-old who just started preschool. And the first week of school, I asked him, I'm like, so, are you excited to go to school? And he's like, well, I'm really not sure because I've never done this before. And that was becoming like his regular thing. Like he was timid and he was afraid because he'd never done it before. And it's like, I see that same response at times in myself, 10 times his age. And it's like, where does that come from? But again, to just cast that aside, to be resilient, to say, God has put me in this position for a purpose, and he's equipped me, and I have a responsibility to pursue maybe some additional training like I'm doing, to take that responsibility, to be accountable for our actions and our decisions, and to not look for that easy out, not look for that excuse.
Yeah, I'll take on kind of both of what you guys were saying about, either early in your career or moving into a new position. I think for me in my own, life and job right now, I feel like, I've only been out of college for, 4 months or so. So it feels like the majority of what I'm, running into or things that are coming up in my job are new. And it's like, I think my natural response to that is, I've never dealt with that before. Like that's something like I'm nervous to do that. What if I fail? What if I'm not doing this the way that, everyone else is that has years of experience in this. And so I think reading this kind of stuff has been really encouraging for me of like, one, that's normal. That's people feel that all the time at any level of the company, any new changes, things like that. But then also just to say that, that's actually can be a really good place to be in. And if I kind of can reframe that into, there's actually opportunities then in that of dealing with new things and, having opportunities to fail as something that's positive rather than negative, I think has been just, this reading has been really encouraging. And I even, just from like a faith perspective in one of the readings, I'm trying to remember who, the Liang reading, it just talks about, there's a quote that says at the end, there is much travail and panic as people look at the devastation, and then talks about some stuff. And then it says, but men and women who have a biblically based worldview know that there is immense opportunity for transforming all these fears by reestablishing them on the rock of solid truths and principles of the kingdom of God. And so I think that was also cool for me to hear. And I just actually biblically we're called to turn those things into opportunities and see those as opportunities to bring glory to God and through our failure and through trying new things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can chime in super quick, and then I think we can probably move on to some of the other readings. But in chapter 16, it was talking about the referee and beating the ref. And I thought that was really interesting to kind of go along with blaming people, talking about barriers, which I think, ultimately you're blaming someone else. And the quote was, instead of focusing on the barriers, let's work to become so good that we'll succeed no matter how many bad calls the ref may throw at us. If you want to win, don't complain about things beyond your control. Just be good enough to beat the ref. And I wrote in the book, I commented like, sometimes I find myself complaining or about someone, and I just kind of got to let go of that, move on and realize that I'm not going to change how they're working and blaming them for something that's not going the way that I thought it should be. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, guys, when I was reading this and they said how can some of these experiences relate to your personal or professional life, in my life, in my work life, we have a responsibility to provide excellent patient care, right, in regards to as a clinician. And some of that I learned that sometimes there's different approaches how you communicate with patients, and patients are more likely respect providers that are very honest with them, even though they make a mistake. In regards to, let's say a lab that they didn't follow through, or a CAT scan that they forgot to tell them about the patient. When the provider takes ownership and accountability, say, being honest with them and being truthful and upright with them, those patients respect those providers versus those other providers that I am the best thing on earth. I can never make a mistake. You know, I don't know. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Even though they might be like the top of the class in regards to the best of the best, physicians, patients, or rather than be they would rather have a provider that's more takes accountability, honest, truthful, than the providers that are very, the word in regards to overconfident or saying that they can never make a mistake. So that kind of relates me in regards to, as a matter of fact, there's a study that showed that those providers are more likely going to get lawsuits. Those ones are way overconfident than those ones that show accountability and empathy towards the patient, even though they both made both of the providers made a mistake. Does that make sense? So that's how I kind of relate in my work in regards to taking, like I said, you might feel horrible in that moment because you feel like I made a mistake, I did something wrong, but that's just part of growth. But where you have to, when you miss, you own up to it and say that you're gonna be better next time.
Should we move on to one of the other readings? Anyone else have anything else? I guess I'm just looking at my notes. If anyone wants to chime in, go for it. Otherwise, let's see. Yeah, I mean, so for me, it was in the how people learn to become resilient. One of the interesting things that I kind of talked about was internal versus external locus of control. I know that was mentioned a little bit in DAFT as well, reading through that. But it basically stated that people that, take self accountability and look at as they can control their own fate and where they end up in life, they tend to be a little bit more resilient and bounce back quicker than someone that's more external, where they think, just whatever happens, there's not much in their control. And for me personally, I'm not saying, I'm not making the connection of like, I'm super resilient person, but like looking at locus of control, I would consider myself internal. And I know in DAFT, I think there was a little section in there you could kind of go through and select stuff and everything. And I was on the internal locus of control side of that. But I thought that was just really interesting with how if you take ownership, and I think it's not what we were talking about previously, you're not blaming other people for what's happening around you or mistakes that have happened. If you take ownership and you understand that this is something that you can work through, you tend to be a little bit more resilient.
Yeah, so I totally agree, Alec. And I want to back up to one of the things that Con said, that ultimately, Con, you described humility, right? In terms of how you're approaching your patient. And in the end, for this week, I've seen how all these readings intertwine with each other, right? There's a lot of crossover in the concepts and the key principles, where Irving and Strauss talked a lot about humility from a biblical perspective and how biblical servant leaders should relate to those within their care. But it also gets to that idea of building trust. And excuse me, was it Horsager that said that, you know, trust is the most important currency in the world today. And so from a provider perspective, if you don't have that trust that comes from being honest and humble, things aren't going to go well. But then, Alec, I'm going to jump to something you said, and this is something I can struggle with also, you know, kind of spinning off my previous comments. Konnikova, this was towards the end of the article, said we can take a minor thing, blow it up in our heads, run through it over and over, and drive ourselves crazy until we feel like that minor thing is the biggest thing that ever happened. And I struggle with that. I really do. You know, it seems like simple things can stress me out. And I'm one of those people who needs to step away from the day to day. I need that time of my own to maybe go work with my hands, reflect on the day, process. I'm an introvert by nature. And those are the times where then I can look back and realize, wow, I wasn't very resilient in that situation. It may not have been outwardly visible to those around me, but man, on the inside, I was just a disaster trying to work through whatever the situation was. And it really took that stepping out of the moment to have a chance to work through it and realize this really wasn't that big of a deal. And then, you know, to learn from that, how can I be more resilient in those kinds of situations the next time, and be able to demonstrate that to my team in a way that helps them be confident in what we're doing, be confident in me as a leader as well.
Alex, I can relate to that as well. You know, taking the smallest thing and blowing it up to the biggest thing that ever happened. I used to struggle with that a lot. And I think, you know, just trying to reflect on like why or what changed for me, because I don't feel like I struggle with it as much now. But I definitely can remember like early on in my career, like thinking about every move I made or every conversation I had to like think, how did I come across? Was that okay? Did I do well? Did I not do well? Like, you know, just really questioned everything. And it just became so time consuming. And unfortunately, at that time, I didn't have good, I think like kind of coping mechanisms, like going outside for a run or doing something productive. And so, you know, I had to learn the hard way that I can't focus on every little detail all the time. I just have to let it be okay and, you know, let it be what it is, and then be resilient if something didn't go well, and know that I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to do better next time. And, but yeah, I just wanted to share that I can relate to that.
Yeah, I appreciate all you guys' vulnerability, Alex and Kayla, because I can relate to that too. And Alex, I also appreciate how sometimes we try to sometimes change others, and we have to realize we can't change them. That's out of our control, right? I think that's something that Miller stressed out, that think of things only that you can control. Another thing I wanted to point out, Alec, that you mentioned was the internal locus control. That kind of touched over me in regards to the children I talked about in regards to coming from really underserved backgrounds. They did not believe they believed in themselves and did not play victim to their circumstances, right? I thought that was pretty remarkable. So like, if I'd like to take that approach, possibly, let's say I go to an interview, let's say I didn't get that position. First of all, I would want to come in there confident, because remember, you're going to say, look, you believe in yourself and you're going to be confident go that interview. But however, if you, for some reason, you didn't get the position, rather than saying the blame game, sometimes it's saying, hey, look, it was not meant to be, versus, man, why did I not get that? There must have been something that, that was, there's something that was the discriminated towards me. And that mindset, I think, really helps me in regards to trying to be an internal locus of control. I'm hoping I can learn from that as well too.
Yeah, to I guess quickly add on to that, I thought that article kind of started with the boy that, didn't have a great home life, and everything, and he brought it, they said, a bread sandwich to school every day. I thought that was, I guess, really touching, that he didn't want people to, be worried about him and feel bad for him and have pity for him. He just wanted to, make sure that everyone around him was doing okay, and, not focused on him, even though, you know, he probably could have had some people focusing and wanting to help him. Um, but yeah, I thought that was honestly kind of sad that, he was doing that, but good for him. And hopefully he was part of I think it was the 2/3 that were resilient.
Yeah, that touched a nerve on me too. It's like your heart sank and you felt really sad, But like you said, he didn't want pity. He just, he just said, look, there's, he didn't let the circumstances allow, his current circumstances allow him to advance in life. So it's remarkable how they learn that at such a young age. And I want to say some of this is innate too, right? It's not something that's taught. It's just some people just have it too. So it's I think it's close to 30 minutes. Does anyone else want to anyone else want to add anything to this week's Zoom meeting and our readings?
I guess touching on Liang quick, to kind of talk more about that, I guess. I thought it was a good point that, again, it was talking about resilience, and it said that I noted and said, God and Jesus give people a reason to have a positive outlook on life and tragic events. And I think this is one of the main reasons why people who live in faith, may, not all the time, but they may be more resilient than other people. It's, again, your outlook on life. Is it positive or is it negative? And that really affects how, I guess, you go about everything and how resilient you might be. So having faith and knowing things happen for a reason, I think that is a key factor in why people of faith might be more resilient than someone who's not.
Yeah, I read this text last, the Liang text, and so it was, for me, it was, I read it, all these other things, and then Ernest Liang kind of tied it all back in with our faith and how does it relate to faith. And for me, that was kind of a cool experience to hear all these things and then have it tied into, that's part of the Christian life. That's part of our faith walk. It's also all these concepts and things, if we're not incorporating them with our faith, if we're not doing them in the context of faith, they're not going to have the same meaning or the same influence. So yeah, cool to kind of hear it through the Christian faith lens at the end.
I think a good outcome of that too is what was mentioned in the video about resilience, that kind of his summarizing point was that it means doing something. And I think it's easy to look at resilience as surviving, making it through a difficult situation. But I mean, he postured that it's more than that, that, what do you call it, proactive behavior. And so it's not just making it to the other end or coming out unscarred. It's taking a definite action in response to the circumstance that leans to the positive instead of that negative.
Something that struck me from that article was just the paragraph where it talks about, Christians who believe in God's trustworthiness live a life suffused with a strong sense of moral purpose, core value, and vision. At the organizational level, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, where individual leadership and small group dynamics strongly influence enterprise adaptiveness and flexibility, these become the critical success factors for the creation of organizational resilience. So it's kind of interesting to tie this back to we're each a person doing our part, learning how to be resilient, tying that back to the success of the organization and how resilient the organization is. I think that, that's just interesting.
Sounds good. Does anyone else have anything to add? All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end it. Thank you, everybody. And then maybe we'll just stay on the line real quick. Is that okay?
Yep.